how's it going? So today on BKRsport, we have another In The Sheds for you. I'm very excited for this one. It's like I'm excited for every single one, to be honest, because every In The Sheds is just really interesting, and we're trying to bring the best of the best for you guys to absolutely devour some sporting content. And I tell you what, tonight is going to be very interesting. It's something that I've been really looking forward to because we've got international rugby league discussion tonight, and I'm not just talking, about NRL or just the general Super League. There is so much more with our guest tonight that is just going to be an incredibly interesting discussion. But obviously, we've got Luke Shirls and Hayden Entertain House as per usual. How we going, boys?
Aye, Captain. Here we are.
Yeah.
Another day, another podcast.
Catchphrase, Shells.
Today, guys, we are going to be having a fellow podcaster who delves into the world of all things international rugby league. I'm not talking simply Australia, England, the likes that we all are very well aware of, the NRL. I'm talking about, lower leagues that, are interesting, but no one really knows too much about because they haven't had, that history like the NRL. I'm talking places like Serbia. I'm talking places like Brazil and Chile and USA. Just those smaller leagues that, like I said, are interesting, but not many people know too much about. With over 50 episodes to his name, over 400 hours worth of content to take in, and knowledge of the game beyond your average fan, our guest tonight is full of incredibly interesting facts that you simply will not want to miss. So like I said, sit back and relax as we welcome in the Chasing Kangaroos Podcast, Michael. How you going, mate?
Yeah, keep smiling, Mike. You deserve it, mate. Yeah.
What an intro. Thanks for having me, boys.
Michael, obviously, fantastic to have you, mate. You're a part of a little bit of a, you're NRL and you love your NRL, but you're a part of a little bit of a different scene as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do on Chasing Kangaroos?
Yeah, the whole point of Chasing Kangaroos was, I guess, we found a little bit of a niche, and we understood that, when we started the show, probably about over a year ago now, we felt that international rugby league was on the rise. Tonga was on the rise. People were interested in this sort of thing, but no one was really talking about it. I always wanted to start a podcast. I'm a big Dragons fan, so originally it was going to be about the Dragons with myself and my mate, also a big Dragons fan. And then we decided last minute to change it to be more about international rugby league, but not just Australia versus New Zealand or England, but about the developing nations around the world, places where people don't even realize the game is played. During the process, I've made so many friends, made so many contacts, and been able to help make so many things happen around the world as well, which has been really cool. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, what there is outside of the big leagues. It's incredible the little known facts and the playing style and the different leagues across the world that don't have anywhere near the facilities or the backing that the NRL does in comparison to, say, a place like, Jamaica, which I saw you did an episode on one time.
Jamaica's huge. Jamaica's, a fun nation to speak about. They've just made their first World Cup. They'll be there at 2021. And it's an interesting story because they've got a lot of heritage players, Jamaican heritage players playing over in the Super League and in the UK system. But they've also got their league, which has been growing stronger and stronger each year over in Jamaica. They've got divisions. They've got school rugby league. Now they've got university rugby league. They've introduced women's rugby league this year. And they're starting to mix in more of those domestic players into their international team. So you're going to see a couple of these guys in their World Cup side next year, and they're just going to get bigger and better as the years go on. So it's a really cool story that not many people know about.
Yeah, no, that's something I'm really looking forward to next year. Obviously in 2017, there was the Rugby League World Cup that was in Australia and New Zealand and Papua New Guinea as well. And we saw a lot of those lesser known nations come out with their players that obviously no one really knows about. But like I said, we'll get into that. Trust me, we've got plenty of that to come through. What I want to ask you to start us off is, we all know the situation that's currently affecting the game. We all know what the world is currently going through. How is this affecting the game from your perspective? What's going on overseas? What do you think is going on with rugby league right now in this situation?
Yeah, well, look, just like the NRL, just like Super League, and just like sport everywhere, it's shut down. Everything is shut down. Everything's being postponed or cancelled. We know the NRL's coming back, or looking to come back May 28, which is awesome news. Heard that a couple of days ago. Well, hopefully anyway. But it's good to see they're trying. I think Super League are going to try to do the same thing. As far as I'm aware, from all the other, like you're talking about, like Dutch Rugby League, USA Rugby League, all those sorts of little competitions around the world. They're at the moment postponing things to later on this year, but whether or not they do go ahead, we'll find out in the months to come. It really depends, it's like we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in a couple of months' time.
Certainly.
So it's interesting times, boys, but hopefully we can get some footy back on no matter where you're from soon.
Yeah.
Michael, do you think that Australia is in the right by bringing NRL back? We all want it to come back, and from a safety point of view, do you feel like other countries should be getting on board and looking at the way that they're going to bring the game back, with whether it's quarantine or what they do? Do you feel like other countries will learn from this and bring their sport back slowly without crowd attendance, or do you see this being a one-off in our country?
Look, that's an interesting question. I'm not 100% sure. I have heard things like the UFC are trying to come back through similar sorts of circumstances.
Yeah.
Some of the American sports, they've got, with the NRL, obviously the financial side of things has been very well documented across the media, and they've copped a lot of slack for having to come back. Personally, if I was a fan of another sport, I'd be wishing that my sport was trying to come back like the NRL are and putting in the effort that they are as well. You've got to look at it from a business perspective. Like every business around the world is trying to figure out how they can survive right now and doing whatever it takes to survive. So why should the NRL or any other sport be different? I commend them for trying to come back for whatever reasons they are, whether it be financial or because the fans genuinely need something to do on the weekends, because it's pretty fucking boring right now. I don't know if I'm
100%, mate.
We'd all be watching footy now.
We would be watching footy right now instead, and there's, hopefully it happens. I'm one of these people that are right behind them.
Yeah,
this would have been one of the best times to watch footy as well. Easter, you've got Rabbitohs and Bulldogs clash. You've got Tigers and Eels, and even international rugby league. It's always a brilliant time to watch the sport.
Well, I just want to say as well quickly that right now, the game we'd be watching right now is the Broncos versus Cowboys at Suncorp Stadium. So, that would have been a phenomenal game to be watching, just to make it, a little bit of a rub-in, it's unfortunate what's going on, but it is what it is. We've seen with the Belarusian Football League that they're still going. Is there literally any small league around the world at all whatsoever that's finding a way to still keep going at all?
No, there's absolutely nothing rugby league wise that I know of. I did hear that the Nicaraguan Rugby League was about to start up their first season, and because I believe there's soccer over there at the moment that's happening, they were keen to see what they could do. It's kind of on hold, but that's the closest I've heard of any nation playing rugby league anywhere in the world right now.
Shout out Nicaragua.
Yeah, shout out to Nicaragua. Yeah, get it up and running so that we can all tune in on a Friday night to watch Nicaragua.
That's an interesting point, though, because rugby league is just so obviously contact-based, hand touching the ball, past another person, they touch the ball with their hand, obviously tackling, cuts, blood. It's just too easy for something to spread. So what do you think when they eventually do come back, what kind of steps we've seen? I think one of the Manly games had disinfectant on the side in Eskies and they're rubbing the ball in that. Do we really need to take those measures the whole year, or is there a way we can just kind of get back to normal kind of footy anytime soon?
That's a good question. I don't think it gets back to normal until there's a vaccine or something like that, right? But look, if the players are quarantined from the rest of the world, if there's Rugby League Island or whatever the answer is, as long as they're regularly tested and they're not in contact with anyone else, then they're probably safer than they would be out in the real world.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, so don't.
Isn't there 4X Island or something? Somewhere there. No, but they have mentioned that. I forget what island was, but it was 40 k's off the coast of Queensland or something. They'd fly everyone in. I think
they've cancelled that idea, though. I think they've cancelled that idea because they're trying to do the May 28, which is going to be based out of Bankwest, ANZ, and Penrith, I believe. Obviously, that island is based off, I think, the UFC's idea, which I 100% believe Dana White will do. I don't doubt it for a second. I just saw before that he said it's going to happen. Obviously, they've had to cancel their event on this month because of everything that's going on. But I'm pretty certain that's going to happen. So I know the NRL would love and ideally for that to happen. but I just can't see it. I can't even see it this year anyway. I don't think they could organise it this year. I don't think it'd be able to be fast enough where you could section off an island and then throw 500, 600, 700 players on that said island, and not players like staff and players and all that would need to be involved, the camera crews. It's just a massive, massive process, and I'd love for it to happen, but it is what it is. Hopefully we do get to see some rugby this year. I want to move into these smaller leagues and what kind of impact this will have on those leagues. There would be a lot of progress that would be seen from the smaller nations. Is this going to impact them severely where they may lose their league or they may lose that progress? Or do you feel like it would just be like a pausing point, Michael?
I think for a lot of the smaller leagues, because it's not professional, right? So these guys aren't getting paid to play. It's not like they're losing their jobs or the competitions are losing income or anything like that. So all the delay is really doing, I hope, is making them hungrier to get back on the field and keep growing the game and keep doing the best that they can. That's certainly what I'm hearing from the people that I'm speaking to in places like Europe, North and South America and Asia. And hopefully that's the case. It's just a matter of, we miss out this year, but going to be even better next year. The only issue might be that a lot of times for rugby league, the competitions in smaller nations like this, they run in a different season to rugby union because they share a lot of players and things like that. So what might happen is there might be a little bit of crossover between the two rugby codes in some of these nations, and there could be some issues there, but I'm sure they can be resolved.
Well, that's the main thing. As long as they can resolve, but I agree. They're obviously not getting paid like the exorbitant fees that we currently are facing within Australia. It's like you said before, the financial aspect of the game has really been thrown at us. It really has been like forced down our throats. That obviously it's been mismanaged. And with saying that, do you feel like maybe that says that the NRL should look into restructuring the wage bill?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, that's a tough one. Look, I think they probably will have to. It really depends on. Like I said, we don't know what the world's going to look like after all of this. You'd assume there would be less sponsors, there'd be less money on the table. Certainly, if there's a shorter competition this year, there's going to be less broadcast money as well. So that's up to, probably smarter or greater minds than mine to work out. But, it doesn't take a scientist to realise that there's going to be a little bit less money, not only in the game, but in all sport and most other businesses as well. It's going to be interesting, but I'm sure something's going to happen.
All right, well, let's move into something a little bit more positive. I want to find out what created your passion for. I want to find your passion for the game and what made you. Like you said, there was a niche that you kind of wanted to explore. But what created your passion for finding these little niche leagues and exposing them for the quality that they have?
I've been asked that a few times. It's hard to pinpoint the moment that I realised I was an expansionist or an international rugby league fan. I think for me, so obviously I'm Australian, right? Obviously you can hear that, but Italian background. So I've always enjoyed seeing what other nationalities are doing rugby league wise. So, in 1995 when I went to the rugby league sevens at the SFS with my old man, and Italy were playing in that sort of piqued my interest, and I thought, oh shit, Italy are playing rugby league, this is cool. So little things like that I got an interest in. Once the 2000s, when there was a lot of international rugby league forums and things like that on the internet, I'd read into things like what was going on in Russia, and I started noticing more of the Super League because we had Foxtel were showing Super League games. So all these little things built up in me, and I just had an interest in all of that sort of thing. And when the opportunity to start this podcast arrived, I just delved even deeper and deeper into it, and it's just become what it is. Been pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, that's great, and obviously 57th episode in, you can definitely see that it's not just like a little side project. You know what I mean? Like you can definitely see that you do specifically have a passion for it, and like you're saying, back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of forums that really surrounded those small leagues. And is those forums still kind of kicking around today, or is it a lot less?
They still do. I'm not on them as much. Now that you've got more social media, there's less reason to be on the forums. Now with podcasts, is just I rather listen to stuff than read stuff, and I don't know. That's just me.
I get confused how you were able to find like a Russian forum that was in English. Like obviously that would have been a little bit of a difficult one to find, because a Russian forum for the Russian league in English would have been not exactly easy.
Funny, no, it is funny. There's always been little bits and pieces of news around Russian rugby league, especially like in the early 2000s. And there were Russian clubs that played in the Challenge Cup, the English Challenge Cup back then. So there was always a lot of English news as well relating to Russian rugby league. But we haven't seen much of that in the last few years. And we released the latest episode of Chasing Kangaroos, episode 57, which is called From Russia With Scums, was all about Russian rugby league and what they're doing right now. Yeah, to my knowledge, it's really the first time that there's been an English sort of version of any sort of Russian news in the last decade. So pretty proud of that, and it was pretty exciting and a lot of fun to record.
Is Russian rugby league very physical? Would that be? Is it obviously incredibly physical in comparison?
Very physical. I mean, they play in the snow sometimes, so you got to be pretty fit to play in the snow, and you got to So yeah, look, it's always physical wherever you play. In a lot of these smaller nations as well, it's not like the NRL where there's 100 cameras on you at any one time, so you can probably get away with a few things that like the NRL boys can't. So yeah, it would be pretty physical and pretty demanding.
Yeah, well, like to specifically reference that, I played water polo throughout my late teens and early 20s, and I really got into my water polo. So you can tell when the cameras are off how much actually happens, whether it be underwater or the dodgy little punches to the stomach, whatnot, and obviously I could relate that to, say, for example, let's use Serbia. We all know that they would be aggressive, to say the least, at times. I would expect that those would be very feisty affairs that could, a lot of things could be swept under the carpet a little bit while the game's on, obviously.
Well, it wouldn't be rare to see like 1980s origin style biff, like between both sides over in the Serbian Rugby League. It's happened recently in a grand final rematch between two clubs, Red Star Belgrade and Partizan Belgrade, all in brawl. And it's not nice to see these days, but there's a lot of
low-key love it, eh? Low-key love a bit of beef.
Well,
Michael, bring back the beef.
That's interesting. You mentioned Red Star and Partizan because they're huge football teams in Europe. They play Champions League.
There's a massive rivalry there too, actually.
Yeah, so it's good to see that these clubs are known in football, soccer teams that are just gigantic in Serbia can also produce rugby league teams, so they have an actual entity kind of backing them. It's not just they've made a club out of nowhere. They have real history and rivalry, much like in European basketball where they have like Real Madrid and Galatasaray, they have basketball teams as well. Yeah, so it's good that they continue it. Sporting clubs, yeah.
Well, yeah, European sport, obviously, we're not used to that over here in Australia, but you've got soccer clubs that also run basketball clubs, and a lot like that's how it sort of works in Serbia with the rugby league clubs. A lot of the Greek rugby league clubs are starting
Olympiacos and stuff, yeah.
Correct. And you mentioned Galatasaray there, I think linking up with a rugby league club in Turkey. So there's all these sorts of things happening, so it's actually pretty cool.
Do you feel like Europe is the next big expansion point? Like we've seen Tonga just, honestly, when they beat Australia and, when they beat New Zealand as well, they have many NRL stars where you go, your Tamalolas, your Fafitas, Pengai Jr., stuff like that. But these European teams have a whole club entity that with lots of money, like your Galatasarays, your Olympiacos, your Real Madrids, that they can actually back them and make them quite big, reputable teams.
If the money's there and the competition is there, then it's possible that Europe could grow. It kind of needs to, like you mentioned, the Tongas and you're going to see Fiji rising in the next few years.
Yeah.
Papua New Guinea are getting better and better. The NRL is really behind growth in the Pacific nations, and they're getting stronger and stronger. He's over in Fiji as well. He's probably seen some of it, but they're getting stronger and stronger. The problem is though, Europe's falling behind when it comes to rugby league. Rugby union's a lot stronger over there, whereas rugby league is kind of a lot stronger over here. So England is obviously the strongest nation rugby league-wise in Europe. France is sort of thereabouts, but they've had their problems. But the problem is England, or in my mind anyway, England rather come over here and play Australia, New Zealand or Tonga, and they're not focusing on their own backyard. They really need to grow the game in Europe, and hopefully, like you say, with some of these clubs coming together, some of the strong soccer clubs, maybe there's some money there.
Michael, I want to ask you, countries like England and countries like where Blaze is, Fiji, are where we see the players come into the NRL, big name stars, but why do you think it's those countries that get these players? Obviously, I think the difficulty is whether they can speak English, but playing ability is a big thing as well. Why aren't we seeing countries like Russia, Serbia, those type of players coming into the NRL?
Well, look, the development just hasn't been there from a young age. So while, yeah, it would be good to see some Russian and Serbians coming through, they just haven't been playing rugby league since they were kids, like, you know, guys from England and so on. There is definitely like a pathway in England and the UK up to the Super League. And a lot of those best players are now coming to the NRL because our salary cap is a lot better. Look at the guys like John Bateman, the Burgess boys, half the Canberra Raiders squad.
Yeah.
So they're able to get the best English players over here. Exactly. Fiji is interesting as well. We're going to see a lot more Fijians come through the NRL now that the Kaviti Silktails, the Fijian side that Petro Sivas behind, are going to be in the Ron Massey Cup, or were meant to be in the Ron Massey Cup this year. That'll be next year now, and they'll be working their way up to New South Wales Cup, the same way that the PNG Hunters side are in the Queensland Cup. And why we're seeing PNG players like Justin Olam playing for the Melbourne Storm now. So the NRL is starting to open up these pathways to nations that are where they can develop some strong talent. It might be a matter of time before they open it up to other European nations. Serbia is one where they legitimately could, in the next decade or so, start finding players because they've got junior rugby league competition starting from 6, 7, 8 years old. I don't think it would take much for some of these guys to really make it over here as well.
Well, I will say on that regards is that I don't know if you watch the Sevens much, but there's a guy, fastest player in rugby sevens, which is Carlin Isles. He originally played he was originally, I think he did play in the NFL very briefly. He didn't make it. Then he went to sevens and track star, but he did try his original game in the NFL, and he obviously went to sevens when he didn't make it, and now he's one of the best players in the sevens game. So, I agree. We could definitely see a pathway in regards to that would, bring out the best in those kind of players too over there.
There's a guy called Joe Eichner. He plays for the Northern Pride, which is the feeder side to the North Queensland Cowboys. Yeah. He's actually American-born, played college football over there, played for the Rugby League for the Jacksonville Axemen in the USA.
My friend plays for them, Charlie Jones,
Oh, Charlie Jones, good player as well. So Joe Eichner played for them, came over with the USA side in 2017 for the World Cup. They played a lot of their games up in Cairns, and he stayed here and kept playing and played for the local side, made his way up to Northern Pride last year, and his rugby league career has really only spanned a few years. He hasn't been playing for that long, and he's already at a standard that is, quite, a lot higher than I've been. And he even himself, when I've spoken to him before, I met him at the Nines World Cup last year. He himself says, look, there were guys that were much more talented than me at college that could have made it if they tried to. So to me, that says a lot. It speaks volumes. I think, we could find Americans or Canadians that would be good enough with some training to make it over here. You look at like Valentine Holmes. I know he didn't make it. Like, he made the Jets squad.
I think he would have if he gave a little bit more of it, like a longer chance at it. I just don't think he gave up too soon, mate.
Exactly right, and there's no reason why it couldn't happen the other way.
He was definitely young enough, Valentine. I feel like when Jared went over, he was late 20s, but Valentine went over at 23, 24 years old, so he gave himself, he could have given himself 3 years. But in terms of why I think the Americans could make the conversion to rugby league is that their athletic programs are so structured and tailored from a young age. Like, you have your Westfields, Keeper Park, they have nice gyms and stuff, and even like lower, the 16s, 18s, Harold Matts and all those types of squads, a lot of them aren't training in nice facilities, while all your high school teams in America have 4 to 5 professional strength coaches, a gigantic gym. It's all paid for. It's all scholarships, and they're just transferring their athletic ability to then be able to technically be good at rugby league, which seems to be the case in the Northern Pride. I feel like America, just because their programs is just so good, they have the ability.
Well, what I will say on that as well is that when I find that in regards to any sport, America, when they latch onto something, they always they want to be the best. America's a very competitive country, and obviously, a lot of countries are. Australia's a very competitive country, but USA, they have the ability that despite they have so many sports all over the place, NFL, NBA, NHL, baseball, the population, but they're still able to spend quite decently if they want to on any sport they choose. And we saw that with football, as in soccer, with the MLS. And we've seen that with the national game in the USA in football. And we've seen Cincinnati, blow up as a team, LA Galaxy to New York FC. The point of the matter is that I feel like if America really backed themselves, they could become, honestly, an incredibly dominant league and potentially nation in the future.
Yeah, they definitely could. I guess the biggest challenge that rugby league would face over in America is it's similar to, or not similar to, but it's the same shaped ball as the NFL. And the NFL is never going to let another similar sport sort of come to the party or play on their turf, so to speak. But look, rugby league are doing it. They've got their major league rugby over there. And I think it's possible for rugby league to carve out a niche. They've got the USARL, which we've mentioned. They've got California Rugby League, which was starting up this year as well, which is obviously on hold until things change, but that'll be happening. You've got a little bit north, you've got the Toronto Wolfpack and the Ottawa Aces that are going to be coming into League One next year as well. There's talk of a professional New York team coming into the English system. There's plenty of potential there. So, and it's a big market, and rugby league just needs a small piece of that, and I think they can get it.
All right. Well, I want to move into the World Cup 2017, and also obviously next year. From that World Cup we saw in 2017, we saw places like France kind of make somewhat of a name for themselves. Lebanon obviously made it. I don't think they did fantastic, but they did well enough to kind of keep themselves as a name. Papua New Guinea, we've all seen the explosion of Papua New Guinea as well. Who were the teams that impressed you in 2017, and who are the teams that you feel will impress you next year?
Look, the obvious one for 2017 was Tonga. They impressed everyone. No one expected them to do what they did, and since then they've beaten everyone. They've beaten Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain, so they've proved that they're right up there. They're a major rugby league nation, so it's hard to go past Tonga in terms of who impressed me in 2017. In 2021, I think the big smoke is going to be Fiji. I think they've got a lot of good talent coming through.
They 100%. They got a lot of good NRL players. They got a lot of NRL. They got a lot of NRL players.
They've got a lot of NRL players. Like I mentioned before, the Kaviti Silktails coming through, so they're going to keep feeding domestic Fijian-born players into that NRL system. And one thing they don't have that most other Islander nations have is a good halfback in Wakeman. Like you look at even Tonga, they didn't. I'm not saying they don't have good halves.
They do lack in the halves. They do lack in the spine compared to other. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And that's something that Pacific Island nations lack. An area they lack in, even up until recently. Like even New Zealand, up until Stacey Jones came along, New Zealand didn't really have. Oh, they had Gary Freeman. They've had one or two, but they didn't have the depth that they have now. Now they've got 3 or 4 halves that could.
Jerome Hughes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think Fiji are the first Pacific Island nation that are going to have some decent halves in their side. They're going to get better and better, and I think by the end of next year, 2021 World Cup, they're going to be a smoky, and they're going to be the ones to watch out for.
I want to ask you this. Obviously, I love Fiji. It's also with I'm someone who can completely back what you're saying. However, like in rugby union 15s, like in the 7s, the way Fiji play is a lot less structure compared to everyone else. They just kind of throw the ball around, hope for the best. And usually it works out from in sevens, but that's because it's a lot more of a free-flowing game where there's so much more space. Do you feel like that's the only problem that could potentially hinder the Fijians, where they just throw the ball around too much and there's not enough structure in the team, considering that's how rugby is played here on the islands?
Look, I hope they do. I love watching them throw the ball around. I think one thing we can't forget is they've made the semi-finals at the last 3 Rugby League World Cups.
Yeah.
So they're used to being there anyway. When it comes to, like, we talk about that structure, a lot of these guys are NRL players as well. And thanks to the Melbourne Storm, a lot of the NRL teams play with this same sort of structure. So these Fijian guys that play in the NRL are going to be used to playing with that as well. Add a little bit of that natural flair that you're talking about, and sometimes when it pays off, it really does, and that's the sort of thing that could spark them to some success.
How does the Fijian team? You said they got the new team in the Ron Massey Cup. How does that work? How do teams are they traveling to Fiji to play, or are they coming here? Or are they a feeder club? So
they'd probably use ANZ Stadium in Suva, wouldn't they, Michael?
I heard they'll had something going with the Sharks, possibly, like they were trying to be a feeder team for an NRL club. How's that kind of all working?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, that Kaviti Silktails team will be the best. There's a 16-team domestic competition in Fiji at the moment. The Silktails will be the best of that competition, basically. That will be their squad. And it will actually probably be the Australian Prime Minister's 13 played Fiji this year against the domestic-based Fijian Prime Minister's 13. That would pretty much be the Kaviti Silktails squad, I would imagine. So they'll be playing over there using, I think, ANZ in Suva as a base, but they will be feeding into, I think they have a deal with the Cronulla Sharks, so they will feed into, from Ron Massey into the Sharks, have a New South
Is it Newtown?
Outside of Newtown, yeah. So they'll feed into Newtown, who feed into Cronulla. So that's the pathway now from Fiji directly to the NRL. And look, I don't think there's anything stopping them with aligning with other clubs as well.
Yeah.
I did hear something about the Tigers a little while ago, but I'm not sure if that's actually happened or happening. I think the Sharks got ahead of them in that area, but who knows how it can happen. It's just one great pathway for now.
Do you think that the Rugby League World Cup and the Nines, which you mentioned before, are doing enough to showcase those players that are coming through? You speak about players coming from overseas into clubs. Do you think we should be seeing that more in those competitions where not just big name NRL players, they're actually showcasing representatives from their country? Or do you think there's enough balance in what they're doing?
It's hard because, like, the NRL are obviously the biggest league in the world. Their prerogative is to run the NRL competition, not so much the international game. They don't run the international game. That's what the IRL, the International Rugby League, do. So the World Cup is run by the International Rugby League. The Nines World Cup is run by the International Rugby League. The NRL supported that this year and ran it for them. They sort of, like, how would you say, it's like a franchise sort of thing. So it's not up to the NRL to sort of grow the game internationally. But in saying that, they are really getting behind these Pacific nations. I think it's a very new thing in our game. The fact that Tonga was so successful at the last World Cup and have been really like, it's since State of Origin really started, we haven't seen anything like the rise of Tonga. So it's very new to our game. I'm not sure how the NRL and other nations are going to deal with that, and other governing bodies are going to deal with that. But I think they're slowly getting there, and we're going to start to see some more balance, like you said. Hey,
Do you think that Australia, Australia, New Zealand, and England, the 3 teams that everyone considers like the big dogs of the international stage, the tier 1 teams, do you feel like they would be happy for, say, this Pacific Island resurgence, or not even resurgence, just like dominance that is obviously forthcoming? Because obviously they've got like a hold as the 3 dominant teams at the moment, but in the same sense, the Pacific Island growth would benefit the game, but then it would also reduce them as the top tier nations. Like, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, look, it depends on what angle you're looking at it from. Obviously, Australia, New Zealand, England want to be the top 3. They want to be fighting for that number 1 spot. I think that New Zealand's currently the world ranked number 1 team. Believe it or not, you'd think it would be the Kangaroos, right? But anyway, that's a story for another day. But look, I think a strong international International Rugby League is a good thing. The NRL is, I guess, going to try and figure out how to cash in on that. They've got the Oceania Cup, which I think could be run a little bit better. They don't have finals and things like that. Like in my mind, New Zealand versus Tonga could be as big over there as State of Origin is over here. And if you're the NRL, if you're running the NRL and you know how much money comes into the game from State of Origin, why wouldn't you be pushing Tonga versus New Zealand to get to that stage? You know, it's in everyone's best interest. So, look, I hope they're thinking along those lines. I think they will be, and we just need to wait and see.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the best way for them to go. Like you said, I just think there is a Pacific Island dominance that is forthcoming, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out, because Australia's been the top for so long. I would love to see, as I'm an Australian, do you guys feel it's become boring with Australia just continuously being at the top? Is this why it's so exciting, even as an Australian, to see these other teams come through?
I cop a little bit of flack for saying this. You know, I am Australian, but for as long as I remember, I've always supported the team that were playing the Kangaroos. I want to see the upset, and I guess that is kind of Australian of me, to barrack the underdog. But
Underdog, yeah.
I've always wanted England to beat Australia. I wanted, when New Zealand beat Australia in 2013 in the World Cup, I celebrated that. When Tonga beat Australia last year, I celebrated that. It was fantastic. So I want to get to a point where one day I can support the Kangaroos, but I want to see the competition. I don't want to see the dominance.
I kind of know what you.
I completely understand what you're saying. I completely
I
understand
know what you're saying in that regard, because when Tonga has come through now, you actually go, hey, you can actually back Tonga to win a game. Like, it used to be just, especially when Australia had like the Darren Lockyer led team and Joey was there and stuff, you just go, well, the Kangaroos, how much are they going to win by? That was literally, you just see them flog everyone 40-12, 38-0. Like, it was always big scorelines, and it was pretty much like the World 13 versus the rest. So now you have Tonga, and they're legitimate, like, title contenders for the World Cup. Like, they're not just some other Pacific Island team making up the numbers. I think they can win it. They have the team to win it. They've shown they can beat everyone. So if they win, it's not going to be a crazy upset. That everyone is kind of backing them. But then with that comes the pressure of living up to that now. That's what they have to deal with now, even though they have superstars.
They have a few issues in their administration as well. They have a few issues in their administration that has been coming to light recently as well.
What's happened there is basically the Tongan National Rugby League has been expelled by the International Rugby League, so they're no longer a part of that. But it's like what happened last year. So there were some financial issues, as you said, Lukey. A lot of the Tongan players, like the Fafitas, the Tamalolos, they had foregone money and gave those funds to the Tongan National Rugby League to sort of help grow the game in Tonga. What happened was, and Fafita came out and said recently that they found out that $80,000 of these funds were used to help fly the Tongan Rugby Union sevens team overseas and things like that. So some of the money was mistreated. The players weren't happy. They also weren't happy about their coach Christian Wolf being sacked. There was a lot going on there between the players and the Tongan National Rugby League. Basically, the Tongan National Rugby League has been expelled by the International Federation. It's why we saw the Tongan Invitational side play last year instead of the Tongan Mate Mar side. And what's happening now is they're trying to rebuild a new administration to run Tongan Rugby League on the islands and the national side as well. So that by 2021, it's a legitimate Tongan side that is representing the islands.
Now, look, I want to kind of jump away from the Pacific Island dominance for a second. I want to get into some players that we may not know, because obviously we watch the NRL, we watch Super League, but just players that we wouldn't really necessarily know that could be on their way up. For example, I'm going to use in 2017. I thought Gary Lowe from Papua New Guinea was doing quite well, but it seems like he just kind of like disappeared. Like, I don't know whatever happened to him, and it kind of happens with a lot of other players in other leagues and stuff. But what's your opinion, Michael? Do you have any players that are kind of coming up that could be like a Gary Lowe, in my opinion?
Papua New Guinea is good. There's a lot of players coming through Papua New Guinea, and we had PNG Hunters coach Matt Church on the show recently, and he told us that there is so much talent in Papua New Guinea that doesn't get to see the light of day in the NRL pathway that would amaze you. Like, we always hear things like we don't have, when we talk about expansion, which obviously isn't on the radar at the moment with what's going on around the world, but in the past when we've spoken about NRL expansion, we say we haven't got enough talent for extra teams. The truth is we do. Like, there's probably enough talent for 2 extra teams based on Papua New Guinea and talent alone if we nurture it correctly and if they come through the ranks. So there's probably plenty of players from Papua New Guinea and the other islands as well. One player I've been watching closely is a guy called Ronan Michael. So he's an Irish player, obviously born and bred in Ireland, moved over to the UK and started playing for the Huddersfield Giants. He's been signed up on a 1-year deal for the Canberra Raiders. So was to be playing lower grades for Canberra this year once the season starts again. He's a front rower, 19 years old, absolute weapon. Probably one of the greatest rugby league or rugby Irish prospects young prospects in a while. It'll be interesting to see how he goes in the lower grades at the Raiders, if he gets a shot in the NRL this year, and if Ricky Stewart decides he wants to keep him around for next year, or if he goes back to the Huddersfield Giants in the Super League. But he's one definitely to watch.
Yeah, I just find it's really sad that these players, for example, the one you just mentioned, that obviously, it's a big time for him. He's come over to the NRL and now he doesn't get that opportunity. And I feel like that's with everyone, I guess. But in the same sense, it's like, he had this massive opportunity and this is just gone, see you later, I'm going to punch you right in the jaw and you're not going to get a chance to show off your talent. And you've made this massive trip over from Ireland, for example, and now he I don't know, it's just very difficult to hear these stories and be like, I was very excited to hear this player evolve, and now he's kind of going to devolve, and hopefully he can just pick it up again at the end of all this.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. It's unfortunate, but there's going to be no lower grades this year, right? So hopefully he gets a chance in that top squad, but we'll just see what happens, and maybe they'll give him another shot next year if the Raiders and the Huddersfield Giants can come to some sort of agreement.
When you say Papua New Guinea, what do you think of Eden Gibby and how he plays? I might be saying the name wrong, but Eden Gibby, when you say Papua New Guinea, that's who I think of as a starting point for the side. The way he plays would be importing players and how it begins, I think.
He's been sensational, right? And he'll be in the South squad this year. I'm looking forward to seeing him play. A lot of speed, great fullback, and I think he's gonna do what Olam's done over at the Storm, like really come in and cement himself straight away. And this is the sort of raw talent that is over there that needs to be nurtured. And
like David Mead, for example.
Well, David Mead's another good. I think David Mead spent a lot of time in his younger years in Queensland as well. But I'm talking about these guys that live in the village in Papua New Guinea. They all speak their different versions of Pidgin Papua New Guinea of their language, but they need to be nurtured and coached and developed. And they're able to now that the PNG Hunter side is there in the Queensland Cup, there is a pathway for these guys, but they're just not able to capture everyone. Eden Gibby is a good one that has come through. He's played Queensland Cup for a couple of years. He played very well for the Pummels last year. In that international week against, I think it was Fiji, and I think he's gonna be an absolute weapon in the NRL. I think there's no doubt about that.
On Papua New Guinea, we've spoken about like the Pacific Islands in regards to Tonga and Fiji. Do you feel like Papua New Guinea, they've been kind of threatening for a few years now. They've been threatening for a few years, but they've never really made it that next step. They've never jumped that next step to being as dominant as we've kind of thought they were building up to be. Do you feel like I don't know if they were ever going to be like a Tonga in my opinion, but you know what I mean? They were building. Do you feel like that way, Michael?
100%. Like, if there's a nation that deserves to be a powerhouse in rugby league, it's Papua New Guinea. They absolutely love the sport. It is
they're
nuts, and it's only a matter of time. What they need is more players in the NRL, more players in Super League, and if they have a national squad worth of players that are playing professional rugby league at NRL level, then you're going to see Papua New Guinea doing great things on the international stage for rugby league.
You said at the start of the podcast that you were based Italy. You support Italy? Is that correct? A bit?
Italian background. So my grandparents are Italian, so if Italy's playing any sport, I'm going to have a soft spot for them. That's for sure.
See, Italy for me really impressed me in the 2017 World Cup. I forget his name, but he led to
James Tedesco.
No.
He's all right.
Played number 11 and he got a big breakaway dummy pass and ended up scoring a double with Joe Omontana. Is that his name?
Possibly.
Possibly. The number 11 for Italy is someone I can potentially see.
Mark Minicello was 12, wasn't he? Or was Mark? Yeah, I'm not too sure, but
I'm trying to remember if that number 11 would have been Italian-born or a heritage player. What Italy or the Italia? So they have FIRL, which is the Federazione Italiana Rugby League, and FIRLA, which is the Federazione Italian Rugby League Australia. Two bodies that work together. Or the FIRLA work under FIRL and help them develop players and raise funds for their competitions over in Italy. There's a lot of good heritage players in Australia. You've mentioned Tedesco. We've mentioned the Minicellos. You've got guys like Paul Vaughan. You've got guys like Nathan Brown. I think Matty John's son, I think his mum is Italian. Yeah, they both have Italian heritage. And what FIRLA do is they really nurture, like they've got about 4 grades worth of Italian heritage players that are coming through, like 16s, 18s, 20s, and their national side. They're very strong. And when it comes to some of these smaller European nations, it's why Italy's always there at the World Cup and always doing well in competition. They've got those Australian-based heritage players. But what they need to do is funnel more of those funds and grow the game more over in Italy. You've got some great players. You've got some good players over there that play both rugby codes. You've got players like, there was a club over there called the Saluzzo Roosters, who there's some good players have come out of that club. There are 3 young guys in there. I think they'd be like 19, 20, 21 that are playing in local Queensland competition at the moment that have come across from Italy to try and develop their skills and then go back and try and sort of teach some of the other guys some of those skills. There's a guy named Charlie Cellerino who might have been that number. He's a front rower for Italy. He might have been coming off the bench at that 2017 World Cup, but he's played over here in Australia. He's played for the West Wales Raiders in League One. He's currently playing in French Elite One. He started at the Saluzzo Roosters in northern Italy. So there are players like that could potentially come through. But it's up to, I guess, the Italian Rugby League to identify these guys and figure out how to help them. What's difficult for some of these nations is, and you guys mentioned Lebanon earlier. A lot of these European nations in particular, Malta's another one, they've got strong heritage based in Australia. So when they compete, they want to win, obviously, or they want to put the best side that they can on the field. So what they do a lot of the time is they put their best heritage players from Australia, from the NRL, from the lower grades into these squads. So what you're essentially getting is an Australian-based Italy side, and that's their strongest side. But what I'd like to see more of is more of an emphasis, and Italy are doing this when they played in their World Cup qualifier this
on the
year.
locals.
Yeah, well, they had an Italia A side that played Germany, and that was a complete domestic side. I want to see more of an emphasis on this. Greece are doing it well. Serbia does it very well. But more and more of these European nations need to be able to focus domestically and bring players through some of these professional channels and one day get stronger and stronger.
I had a question. I'm trying to think of the question I was going to ask you. That's right. All these different teams that you find overseas, do they all have an Australian-based contingent? Like, for example, Malta. Like, would there be a Malta? Like, is there someone in the Malta team that is an Australian-based who could be playing for, like, say, Wentworthville Magpies or something like that? Is that what you get for every single team?
Yeah, 100%. So Malta's a good example of what I just said. Malta, most of the Maltese rugby league is based in Sydney, in Western Sydney.
Okay.
So they rely heavily on their heritage players. They do have minor competition on the islands in Malta, locals versus the expats or something like that, the Black Knights versus the Red Knights. So they do have a little bit of rugby league over there, but most of their rugby league is based here in Australia. So there are nations like that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you then in regards to that they really should be emphasising on their locals and stuff because, with Fiji, obviously there is that large contingent of NRL players, but there is a large contingent of locals as well that really learn from those and they will eventually probably become those guys in that position later on. And I feel like if you're focusing too heavily outside of your country, you're never really going to be able to give that opportunity within the country to grow, and especially in the league inside the country.
That's right, and that's why earlier I spoke about a potential European club competition. that is in the works. That's really important to get off the ground, because the reason you're not seeing a lot of the domestic guys from, say, a site, in Italy, for example, playing in that Italia squad is some of these guys can't compete with even like the Queensland Cup or New South Wales Cup based Australian players that are training professionally week in, week out in some of the toughest competitions in the world. Don't forget, Queensland Cup, New South Wales Cup, it's pretty close to Super League in terms of standard. Like it's big time, yeah. They're like the top 3 rugby league competitions in the world are all in Australia. So you need to remember that. So a lot of these domestic players in nations around Europe, for example, they don't play that standard and quality week in, week out. So that's why this European competition that has been proposed is so important, because it can lift the standards, give them more game time against better players, and hopefully raise the quality of these nations so that we can get even stronger, more than 4 nations that can win a World Cup.
Well, that's the ultimate goal, really. Competitiveness. Like we've spoken just before, it is boring at the moment with Australia just constantly winning. So I would honestly back a team like, say, if Italy played in the final against Australia. It's hard for me, because it's like, yes, I would want Australia to win, but in the same sense, it's like I would back Italy to be that team to beat them, and we won't see that just yet until it does become more competitive at, say, grassroots, if you want to call it that, or just the actual leagues itself, like you were just talking about. So I'm very excited to see what is to come, really, and that's why your podcast is Chasing Kangaroos Podcast is the best to listen into for that, because you obviously delve into all these on a consistent basis.
I appreciate you saying that, man, and yeah, I just hope it gets better and better. Things are better than they have been in the past. International Rugby League is growing, and it's really exciting. So we try and talk about it as much as we can on the show.
What is your ultimate goal with Chasing Kangaroos Podcast? Do you have like a goal, or do you just kind of want to continue going and something happens does it just keep growing, or is there an ultimate goal that you have with Chasing Kangaroos?
That's a really good question. And when we started the show, it was just for a little bit of fun and just to have a podcast. Last year, I was asked to host the official International Rugby League show by the IRL, which was a lot of fun. We did 6 episodes, and we're going to be hopefully doing that again this year, depending on what happens with the Kangaroo Tour. So maybe that's a little bit up in the air. I was on the judging panel for the Golden Boot, which was really cool. And these are sorts of things that I never would have anticipated or expected, So I'm sort of taking stuff like that as it comes, one day at a time. Getting asked to be on your podcast as well, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
For me, I see Chasing Kangaroos as more than a podcast, and what I'm actually doing right now is I've been able to develop a really strong network. So I've got good friends around the world of rugby league, and what we've been able to do is connect some of these nations as well, because the networking between some of the nations hasn't been that strong. But through our podcast, and this is really crazy, but through our podcast, they're finding out about each other and able to do more things off the back of that. So, for example, I spoke about the Russian Rugby League episode that we recorded last week. Off the back of that, so representatives from 2 other nations in Europe contacted me to get the contacts for the Russian guys so that they could start to organise some games between their nations. And that's really freaking cool.
That's incredible.
I see it being more of a community and a network. From there, who knows what happens, but it's really all about #grow the game and seeing what we can do to help some of these nations as well to grow the sport.
Yeah, well, exactly. I also wanted to put an emphasis on the fact that without content creators like yourself, not many people get exposed to these games. Like I've said at the beginning of this podcast, they're very interesting, and it's something that I personally love to listen to and love to hear about. But not many people would if it wasn't for yourself, if it wasn't for the Chasing Kangaroos podcast. So that's why I think what you do is actually also quite pivotal to the success of these lower leagues and the growth of the game overseas, because without you, there is no real serious exposure in, say, for example, Australia, in our country.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and again, it's kind of weird that I'm the person that's sort of giving exposure to some of these nations. It's really cool, but people say things like that to me all the time, and it's quite humbling We're just trying to have some fun and shed some light on the sport in places that people didn't even know played the game, and whatever we can do, we'll keep doing, and hopefully it's all for the best.
Now, just before we finish up, we've been going for about an hour now, but just before we finish up, I want to ask all three of you, because I don't think I've asked either of you two yet either, but first we'll go with Michael. If the game does, and this is NRL based, if the game gets back to itself and we start to see the financial game aspect, imagine the financial aspects have been sorted out. Which two nations would you include, or which two teams would you include, not nations, which two teams would you include into the NRL if you could, in a perfect world, add two teams in right now?
Okay, good question. I think Perth is one that I'd bring straight in. A lot of people talk about Brisbane too. Financially makes a lot of sense. For me, I would like to see that, but I kind of struggle to understand who would support a second Brisbane team. Maybe in decades to come, they would build more of a following, but I struggle to sort of understand that. I'd like to see a second team in New Zealand, whether it be like Canterbury, Christchurch, or Wellington area. I think that would be really cool. So for me, it would be Perth and New Zealand too.
I'd say the same with New Zealand. I think, as we've said in a couple of our podcasts, North Island versus South Island, we've got the New Zealand Warriors, the expansion of that, and the potential for rivalry.
Oh, that'd be like a state of origin of New Zealand. It'd be insane. It'd be insane with that.
It would. And I know I might sound a bit biased here, but being from the Central Coast, I would love to see the Coast Bears, and the use of our stadium is underused.
I tell you what though, Luke, we'll get to you in 1 second, but I don't know, it's basically another Sydney team if you think about it. In reality, in regards to how close it all is.
The funny thing,
Central Coast, I think Central Coast deserves a team, but it would have to be at the expense of
a relocation or something.
And Newcastle, you'd have Newcastle fans going, you know what I mean? They all support Newcastle.
just on that part, the funny thing is, and I feel like you'll all agree with me when I say this here, Central Coast is a breeding ground for a lot of big name players. You've got players like James Maloney, you've got players like Ikavalu who's coming through. Those type of players are playing their first career games on the Central Coast. That's the breeding ground. I feel like there is so much potential. Without being biased, there is a lot that could be done with the players that play in Central Coast football.
Look, I wouldn't deny you. I wouldn't deny it, but in the same sense, you'd need a relocation because otherwise Newcastle there, and then there's just too many teams.
And they have Central Coast Roosters as well as a feeder club to Sydney. So I know what you're saying. There's a stadium there, there's a tomato sauce bottle that hangs out there in the A-League, but apart from that, the Master Foods bottle, I would say New Zealand's 100%. But I don't think you can have one at Adelaide or Perth. They're just too AFL based. It's like Tasmania. Tasmania is a weird place because it doesn't really have anything down there. No one really wants to go there. So it would be. I'd love to see PNG, Port Moresby side. That would be a
Where I argue with you on that is that I agree the passion is there. We've spoken about the passion of Papua New Guineans. It's insane. There is second to none in regards to passion from rugby league there. It does come into question though the tourism aspect of Papua New Guinea and people actually being able to travel there. Obviously, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but there are complications with that becoming a team on a national level where we can include PNG. I would love it. It's like I would love Fiji. I just don't think it's necessarily in the near future. I know they're talking about it, but Queensland Cup's a little bit different because there's not really too much of a tourism involved with the Queensland Cup. Would you agree with that, Michael?
Yeah, I do. I think the big thing for a Port Moresby side would be finance and like you said, the tourism side of things. I think we're more likely to see, like you said, the pathways there for Papua New Guinean players to play through to filter throughout the NRL. And I'd rather see 100 Papua New Guineans play for all the NRL clubs rather than them focus on one club.
Fair enough.
Warriors. So I think we're less likely to see, as cool as it would be, and they would go nuts for it. But I think every Papua New Guinean has an NRL team that they support, and if you base a side in Papua New Guinea, in Port Moresby,
they won't go to the other teams.
You dilute all all of that brand power for the other clubs. And I can't see it happening in the near future.
For the other Brisbane club, I just don't see Brisbane allowing that to happen. They want to be a one city club, you know what I mean? Like Newcastle, it's like bringing in another Newcastle, another Brisbane team. Yeah, there's heaps of people that go Suncorp, blah, 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 but they don't want that to halve or a quarter of that's automatically gone because they decide to support, I don't know, Brisbane Bears or whatever they want to call it. Like, imagine going to Ipswich for a game, eh?
We already go to Parramatta for a game, Luke. We already go for
It's a scorcher out there. It's a hot one out of Ipswich.
Yeah,
But like Northern Territory, I feel like the west, the middle of Australia, like you got your Darwin and your Adelaide and stuff, and then you got Perth to the left and Broome. They're all occupied by AFL. They're not going to let go of those areas. It's just I think we really need to shore up the Pacific Islands, but I think the New Zealand team is a definite one.
Well, we've got the Pacific Islands in the Queensland Cup, at the Ron Massey Cup, and also New Zealand in the NRL, and obviously Tonga is just included with all of that and all their players and their rugby league team as a whole. But I'm going to have to wrap us up, boys. We have been going for an hour now. We obviously could just continue talking about this forever and ever and ever. We could honestly keep talking about this, but you know, we have to cut it before we just keep going for 3 hours. So I really want to say thank you to Chasing Kangaroos Podcast for jumping on here. It's been a fantastic conversation. You know, it's been in depth about absolutely everything to do with International Rugby League. So thank you to Mike for coming on.
Thanks, boys. It's been a fun chat. I can't believe an hour's gone past, but yeah, it's been really cool. Thanks for having me on, and you know, hopefully we've been able to shed some light for your listeners and your viewers as well on where else the game is.
100%. I want to obviously make a massive shout out to Chasing Kangaroos Podcast. If you don't know, where can you find? I believe Apple. Is it Apple on Apple? You can find the podcast.
Yeah, pretty much anywhere where you can listen to a podcast, it's there. So just look up Chasing Kangaroos, you'll find us. The logo is a little black chevron, a little kangaroo. Yeah, have a listen. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Look up Chasing Kangaroos. And
so yeah, definitely go and check that out, Chasing Kangaroos Podcast. And then we've also got Luke and Hayden, obviously Entertain House and Shells. Thank you for them for coming on as per usual.
Still my job, mate. Still my job.
Another day, another podcast, eh, mate?
Yeah, that's it. Another day, another ending to the podcast.
Also, guys, obviously, if you haven't subscribed to BKRsport yet, go down there, hit the subscribe button, join the BK Army. We've also got an Instagram page, which is for In The Shed specifically, so definitely go and check that out. We're posting frequently there of all the major news in just regards to all sport, obviously. You know, this isn't just a rugby league podcast. We've had AFL guests in the past. We've got football guests coming up. We've got we've had rugby league in sevens. We're all over the place, and we're doing our best to get some American sports started on as well. So definitely hit that notification bell and follow all our social medias to keep up to date with what we're doing and who we're getting on. I hope you have enjoyed. Obviously, leave a comment below if you have any questions, and I hope you guys stay safe and stay healthy. So that'll do us for today, guys. Thanks so much. Catch you later.